All right, welcome everybody. We are delighted to have you here with us today at Alma, the home of Hebrew culture in Tel Aviv. I thought, as an introduction, Ruth, to say something that I'd always like to say when we're here together, and it is that I think it's really amazing, it's really rather incredible that we live in a universe where ideas can be realized. There could have been a universe with only ideas, and there could be a universe with realization but without ideas. But we live in this very amazing universe where both people can have ideas and they can actually bring them to fruition in reality. They can actualize them. And this whole beautiful building and all the incredible activity that happens in it, all of it together, is the realization of the vision of this amazing woman we have the blessing of having with us here today, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Ruth Calderon. And so what we thought of doing in this short conversation is to give an opportunity to our friends around the world, in the English-speaking world, but around the world more generally, to have some idea about the reasons for the establishment of Alma, the kind of activities we do here, and perhaps most importantly, the ideas, the ideology that we seek to promote and to advance. So let's go straight to the jugular. Dr. Ruth Calderon, perhaps.
Let me just introduce you. Dr. Jeremy Fogel is on the faculty of Alma. He teaches philosophy, and he's one of the brightest minds I know. So thank you for interviewing me.
Thank you very much. So, you know, when we interview our fellows here, you always like to start by asking who they are, where they come from. So perhaps for people in the audience who might not know these biographical facts, like who are you, Dr. Ruth Calderon? Where do you come from?
So like everyone else, I come from my parents. So I was born and I still live in an apartment in Tel Aviv, north to the Yarkon River. And I'm the daughter of a mother, Miriam Margot, that came from Germany, and a father, Moshe, that came from Bulgaria, a Sephardi, Spanish origin Jew. And I'm the third girl after two older brothers that are still the stars of my world. And I was raised in the very mainstream, secular, Israeli kind of normal, what we thought is the normal or the mainstream Israeli Jewish secular community. And I still live in this community, and I feel that my work, my cultural work, is within what used to be the majority of Israelis, secular Jews, and maybe today is no more the majority, but trying to bring, if I can say it in one phrase, trying to bring this richness and the treasures of Jewish culture into the public sphere, into the everyday of Israeli culture.
And so if we're looking at some, you know, stages of your life that is filled with activity and explorations, and the doctor before your name is a doctorate in Talmud. So maybe I think it would be interesting for you to tell us what drew, when you started studying Talmud, you were a young, secular Israeli woman. What drew you to study the Talmud? Why would a person like this find interest in these rabbinic, ancient rabbinic texts that are cornerstones of religious Jewish culture, but why would it be of interest to a secular young woman?
Well, that's kind of the million-dollar question that I asked myself. It didn't happen then, it happened much earlier. And I think the fact that I was raised between cultures, the Ashkenazi Jewish culture and the Sephardi Jewish culture, and there was a clash between, not in a bad way, but there was a lot of difference between the different grandparents' homes. I think from a very early age, I was intrigued by something that I felt my parents have or touched, and it's not on the surface of the everyday life that I live in, the scouts and school and the beach, you know, the Israeli 70s, 60s and 70s. And I was about 12, I think, when I started kind of a thirst feeling this thirst for something of religiosi, something that is beyond what we see on the surface, that has to do with spirituality. These are words that didn't exist in the Hebrew that I talked, that I used at the time, because religious, the 70s and the 60s when I was growing up, there was a very harsh divide between dati and chiloni, religious and secular, and there was no crossing the lines. Either you're this and it comes with the whole baggage, or you're that. And I grew up secular, and I knew that these black books with the gold letters on them belong to them. It's kind of Romeo and Juliet of young Israel. It's not mine. It's not something that my father studies, but it does touch stories that my father told me about his grandfather, who was a rabbi in Turkey and Bulgaria. Hasidic stories that my mother and her father used to tell me when I was, they put me to bed at night. So there was like a journey that I started. I saw that my mom is worried that I'm going to cross the lines. My father was kind of amused, and that started a very long journey where I felt like I'm like a bird that is trying to build a nest, but I don't have the thread,
branches,
and I'm collecting little pieces here and there to try and make a Jewish life for myself that will be honest and respectful of the secular way that I was raised, that I appreciated and didn't feel I want to move away from at all. And at the same time, cross the lines to those riches, those treasures that I felt are there, and I want to study. I think there was a class of Talmud at some point in high school when one teacher went on a maternity leave, and the principal gave us a class in Talmud, and I got a very good grade. And I thought, wow, what is this book? Where can I get it? And it took another 10 years, I think, before I managed to actually touch a book of Talmud and open it.
And what was, in a few words, what was the heart of your research when you ended up doing a PhD in Talmud? What were the kind of questions that you worked on?
What kind of caught my heart in the Talmud is mostly the literature within it, and even more in detail, the short miniature stories, some few hundred very minimal short stories that are mostly about the rabbis as the protagonists. And there is such art in the way these stories are written and told, and such depth, that the literature of the Babylonian Talmud is what I try to specialize on.
And I think what is interesting is that you didn't only do academic work on the Talmud, you also chose to take from the, if we think about it as two camps, which we shouldn't, but you take from the religious camp also from the Talmud a certain methodology of learning, of study, a culture of study, that it seemed to you would be of value also in the secular world. And you, in the 90s, start the institution or the kind of way of study that would eventually lead to Alma.
The first Bet Midrash.
The first secular Bet Midrash.
Right.
So I think this is quite important for our audience because, you know, once this is on the internet, it's going to stay there for hundreds of years. So in hundreds of years, when people ask, what was this Hebrew Jewish renewal at the end of the 20th century, you know, they have to look at this lady to understand where it all began. So could you tell us about these early days of Hitchadshut Yehudit, Jewish renewal in Tel Aviv, in Israel?
So of course it's not only me, and I'm part of a whole zeitgeist, spirit of the time. But what happened to me is that I actually went to the academia only because the yeshivot, the batei midrash, the traditional places of study would never accept me because I was twice removed from them. I was a woman and I was secular, and I wasn't going to change either. So I went to the university to Oranim, the Kibbutz Movement University, and then I was sent by my teacher זיכרונו לברכה, מאיר איילי, sent me to his friend at the Talmud department of Hebrew University, which is, and at least I think so, the top of Talmud study in the world. And I was the only one coming there without a beard and a yarmulke, except for Professor Vered Noam, that was older than me there, and she won the Israel Prize this year. She's exceptional. But in my class, I was the only woman. So I came to the university, but not to study Talmud as an academic research from afar. I wanted to live it. I wanted it to affect me. I wanted to take it and to bring it home and to bring it into the Israeli street and back to Tel Aviv. And so the pedagogy of Bet Midrash, of Chevruta study, of finding someone that is as strong as you, but thinks completely differently, and maybe that echoes my grandparents and my parents from different cultures, and to find someone to have a dispute with, to what I think the rabbis have brought to the world, the machloket, the dispute, that is a way of diving into the truth and touching the depth of an issue. It's a philosophical tool. So that is part of the pedagogy, the Chevruta, and the way, the structure of study in a Bet Midrash, and that is what I established in the Lul together with partners. Bet Midrash is in some ways like kindergarten. It is a way of study that is not frontal. It's not that the teacher teaches and everybody has to write down, but rather there's an issue or a subject or a tractate in the Talmud, and everybody is studying it, but each little group that is called Chevruta, every pair is studying it in their own pace, and they can go to different places, to different books. You should study it in a place filled with books. And so while the hours of study, the time of study is a very free-spirited kind of study, and then what we called asif, we gather everything that happened in the Chevruta and we share with each other the fruit of that Chevruta
that dialectical encounter. And so what, could you just really describe to us what it looked like at the very beginning, like the first few meetings were, you know, because I imagine people sitting there a little bit weird, a little embarrassed, you know, what are we, like, how are we, what are we actually, like, how was it physically like when you first started Elul?
Yeah. So the first thing was, you know, back then, maybe you don't know, we had little books with the names of our friends and the phone numbers. So it starts from your phone book. Do you remember that? By ABC. And so it started with my phone book, and I was looking for partners, and I went from Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Gira, that's a good name, Dalet, like who could be a partner. And I started it with a man called Moti Bar-Or, who was from the religious world, and he brought his friends. So the first few meetings at home in the living room were just getting people to meet. And in like every group that establishes something, the first group is always very dominant, strong, a lot of ego and a lot of charisma in the room. And each one of them today is head of some institution. So the first thing was just introducing ourselves and finding the tension in the room. Something is very intriguing by just knowing the different people. And then the first year we rented a place. We would come in the morning for 5 hours a day, 3-4 times a week, and we chose a tractate. We started with Brachot in the Babylonita, the first one, and each one of us was responsible for a week or two that took the responsibility of preparing the Chevruta study, and then like taking charge of the Asif, and the next 2 weeks someone else did it, and each one of us was sharing what we were studying in the university and becoming more professional in.
Amazing. And so that is the first seeds that would lead eventually to Alma.
Yes. I just want to say a few more sentences. There was no head. There was no rabbi. There was no professor. We were all the same age. Moti and myself were directors, but we were the age of everyone else. And it was very important to me to establish a first Bet Midrash that doesn't have a rabbi, that doesn't have one vision or way of thinking that doesn't tell the students to wear or not wear a yarmulke, to keep Shabbat in this way or another, but a completely free ground. And we were half and half, men and women, and religious and secular. So the debates were not just intuitions, but also communities, and it was very dramatic, and there was something about it a little bit like us at Alma here. It was more of a home than a university. We brought food, we had coffee, people made cake.
And at the time you studied only the Talmud tractates, or did you also start using that methodology, pedagogical methodology and dialectical energy to study other texts?
Yeah, we studied everything. We tried to study Bible, Talmud, Bible, Mishnah, Talmud, Kabbalah, Hasidut, and then Hebrew literature, Hebrew poetry, philosophy. I remember we studied Kafka. When we were studying Gan Eden, we studied Yona Volach, and there were all questions about, can you say words that are not polite or not, and sexual words and so forth. So it was, the library was one of the new things about Elul, that the library will host together different kinds of books. It wasn't like a Jewish library or a non-Jewish library, it was all together. And there were questions, halachic questions. The religious people in the room were telling us that they will not bless Birkat Torah before they study Kafka. Okay, so you don't.
That's a grave sin against the Jewish culture.
There was a lot of tension that is difficult to explain in Tel Aviv. And then there was the assassination of the Prime Minister Rabin. And that was a very hard time in the Bet Midrash. That was, again, kind of, everybody fell back to their own communities. And after that, I think a year after that, I decided, after I was studying at the Mandel first cohort of School for Education and Leadership, my second project was Alma in Tel Aviv. But just saying, after Elul, Hamidrasha in Oranim was established, and different Bina was established, and different institutions of Jewish renewal started flourishing in Israel.
It is reminiscent of, we had an evening here with Yehuda Arel a few weeks ago, and he said that, he used Darwinistic evolutionary theory to talk about how ideas evolve. And he said, if you have a small thing, even if it's not many people gathering in a private home, if it works, if there's demand for it, it will spread. And really, as you say, very soon after Elul, you had all these different institutions that are now still central to Jewish renewal, to what is called Jewish renewal here in Israel. So maybe could you tell us a little bit about how Alma started? Like, so you mentioned the murder of Rabin, and you working on this while being a fellow at the Mandel Institute.
Right.
How did it actually get going?
I think, like in a Hasidic story, that I left home and I went to the kibbutz movement to meet ideological visionary people. And I met them, and they were wonderful and human. And then I went to Jerusalem to meet the religious community, and I thought, this is where I'll find the treasure. And again, they were wonderful and human. And then I understood that the treasure is in the backyard, and I went back home to Tel Aviv. Now, Tel Aviv is a very big deal for me. I think it has a bad reputation in the Jewish world in many ways, that when they bring the buses and the mishlachot, the delegations to Israel, they usually go to Jerusalem, Saturday in Jerusalem, and then they come to Tel Aviv for shopping.
Big mistake.
One afternoon. And what I was trying to do, and what I still try to do, is to say that Tel Aviv is a place full of Jewish ideology. And this is the New York of Israel. This is where, mixed with Los Angeles, this is where all the artists, the musicians, the writers, the poets, the dancers, the television people, the journalists, a lot of the spirit of Israel is dafka happening in Tel Aviv. And the fact that Tel Aviv, not every stone is holy, and King David did not walk in Allenby Street, is not something that takes away something from Tel Aviv, but I see it as a benefit, because there is an ideology, a Jewish ideology and vision that Tel Aviv embodies. And in my eyes, it's a nice small town, very human, very human in many ways. People say hi to you. You can dress in whatever way you want. The beach is the end of all streets, the sea, and people go down there in the evening. I just love Tel Aviv, and I love the poets in Tel Aviv and the writers. And I wanted to build a Bet Midrash in Tel Aviv because I am not accepting this divide again, that if we're secular, we are not spiritual. We don't have God within us. That's not my experience. And I want to have a place here that allows people to feel spiritual, but doesn't make them spiritual in a way that I will decide. Since I was young, I made an effort to never tell people what to do, just because I don't know the truth. And I don't want all our fellows to do the same thing and to accept Shabbat in the same way. Or I think part of the truth lies in their minds, and I want to learn from them. So this is what I thought Alma should.
And also, I think that in the terms of Hebrew culture, we have a situation where people who are secular feel disenfranchised from aspects of their culture, because even if the Talmud is a religious text, even for people who do not find any spiritual solace in the Talmud, it could still be part of their cultural heritage, and they could just have a curiosity and a desire to know their own culture and to reclaim it, however, wherever they find themselves on that continuum between orthodoxy and secularism.
I can see a serious Jewish scholar or thinker do without such a big bulk of Jewish creativity. It's so just why it's so good, it's so wise, it's so interesting, it's so sophisticated. It talks about how to run a community, it talks about philosophy, it talks about love, it talks about life. I mean, I'm not objective, I love the Talmud, but I think I don't want everyone to be to specialize in Talmud, but I think normal Jewish education in Israel can do this gap that the first generation of educators decided on, to teach us a lot of Bible, and then from King David to David Ben Gurion, and take away all the rabbinic culture and literature, was a mistake. And I'm sure they had good reasons, but it is our work, as you said, to reclaim it, to fill ourselves up and to be built strongly to have a good base in order to go forward and to create new things.
Also, there's something that I've learned from you that I've heard you said repeatedly, is that the Bible deals with these grandiose, dramatic scenes, and the sea is spread, and the volcanoes, and the this, and Mount Sinai.
It's in oil colors.
It's awesome, and then the Talmud is a husband, a wife, a room.
Pass me the salt. I always think the Bible was created in oils, and the Talmud is in aquarels. It's like one sentence and something very like a low budget Czech movie, student Czech movie. It's like a man and a woman and salt and the bread, and everything is in that scene. You don't need to open the Red Sea and to have horses, and it's like a European
arts films versus the Ten Commandments.
Hollywood.
And then also, before we go back to Alma, we have to travel with you among the many places to which you traveled. But I think one of the things that people might have heard about was the way you brought that vision about the Talmud and about Hebrew culture to the Israeli parliament. At some point, all of this cultural, intellectual activity, and you're also a writer, and you write children's books, but at some point you've got political moments. Could you maybe just tell us about that?
Yeah. I'm a very small politician, but the way it happened was that Yair Lapid actually studied with me and with us, and
he was a journalist at the time.
He was a journalist, right? And he invited me to his television show, and then I invited him to a cheder. I had a text show for a few years, and we had a quarrel, which was the way to become friends, and we became friendly, and we studied for. He was writing a book about biblical heroes, and we studied together. And then he told me that he had a vision of coming into parliament together, many people, each one from, all of them not politicians, and from different specialties. And I was kind of course, very encouraging, but I never thought that I will be part of it. And then history showed otherwise, and he actually built Yesh Atid. And I was working at the time at the National Library, and he asked me, do I want to come? And last minute I said, you know what, I'm on, and I found myself in parliament.
And your opening speech became this viral phenomenon. And I think that a lot of the ideas we've been talking about made their way to that speech. Could you maybe talk a little bit about what you said there, and how you try to actually put into practice in your career as a parliamentarian?
You know, I said there what I always said. They told us 2 days earlier, you have to introduce yourselves in 15 minutes. And I thought, how do I introduce myself? What do I know? And I'll bring a text. And I brought a text. What I think was very phenomenal there wasn't what I said, but more what happened, because the chair,
the chair of the parliament.
Yeah,
היושב-ראש. The chair.
Was from Shas, was an ultra-Orthodox Sephardic man. And traditionally, you know, we don't study together. And I was doing my teaching, but he got interested because he's sitting there for so many hours, and suddenly I'm teaching something that he knows, and he started talking with me in Torah. Now the people sitting in the audience saw that we are engaged in Torah, and they didn't know how to interpret
the audience
this.
Is the actual parliament.
The parliament.
So just for people to understand, there's basically a kind of Talmudic debate between you and the chair of parliament in parliament.
Right.
Which would be highly unusual because he comes from the traditional world and
yeah, right. And suddenly something happened there with all these people that are the voice of communities. And usually I'm teaching in my community and he's studying in his community. And I think the magic that happened in that 15 minutes was that in a very special way, which is what I want to do, to have a space where all of us meet, studying the books that we all share, that we all own together, that do not belong to this community or that.
I know that you actually sought to have like a studying time together of parliamentarians.
We had the Bet Midrash in the Knesset every Tuesday afternoon.
It's funny, wherever they throw you, there's a Beit Midrash.
Right, because I'm like a fish, that's my water. So yeah, in the library of the Knesset, we held the Bet Midrash every week. I can't say that all the parliament always took part, but it was always full and people came from the outside, and I hosted rabbis from all over the world, and it was like meditation before going into, you know, the usual fighting
of politics. So going back to Alma, maybe I'll say a few words. Alma now is back full throttle. We have our fellowship program where we have young artists and people in culture and journalists and teachers who come together around this beautiful table here and study. Again, the cornerstone is always the Talmudic, Beit Midrashic study, but there's also philosophy, general philosophy,
literature,
Arabic. We have each semester a different figure in Israeli culture or politics that just basically teaches their own activity. So we have this very rich curriculum for the fellowship programs. We have a wide variety of cultural events in the evenings. We have book launches, and we have debates, and we have lectures and whatnot. And all of it under this title of Home for Hebrew Culture. And I think that I think it will be very important to try and talk again a bit more about Hebrew culture. What is, in your eyes, Dr. Ruth Calderon, Hebrew culture? What is its significance? Why is it something that you've dedicated so much time in? Why is it something the importance of which you're always trying to emphasize and to promote?
Thank you for the question. I think Hebrew culture, like secularism, are words that make it difficult to talk between Israel and the Jews in the world because they mean different things. Secular in Israel doesn't mean someone that is not Jewish or doesn't celebrate their Jewishness, and Hebrew culture doesn't mean the language Hebrew, but it is. I just wanted to mention about what we have here under this roof. The fellowship program is our wish to educate Israeli intellectuals and to try to build a full, rounded intellectual that goes back into the public sphere and affects Israel. But Hebrew culture is actually a term by Chadam, I think we have him down here, and Chaim Nachman Bialik, who are both my great teachers that I never got to know. And they are both what we call in Hebrew datlashim, datim לשעבר. They were raised in a religious framework.
Datlash, like ex-religious.
Yeah. They were both raised in religious homes and yeshivot. Chadam, maybe not, Bialik. And they lived in a time when I think the first time the Jews came out of the traditional closed shtetl or little community in the Sephardic world and tried to merge and to take part in the university, in the Enlightenment movement, or again, zeitgeist, spirit of the time. And so some, or maybe the majority of Jews, lost their Judaism while coming out, but there was a stream of Jews that came out of the traditional world, wanted to walk in and take part in the general culture, but wanted to keep the richness, the language, the identity of where they came from. And they came up with the term Hebrew culture. Chadam said that like every people, the Russian people have a spirit, French have their own spirit, Spanish people have their spirit. The Jewish tradition is also a people, nationality. We are also a people, and the Jewish people have a spirit. And even if you're not religious, you can keep and work for and make this spirit flourish. And in order to be a worker in this Jewish culture, you need to know where you come from. You need to master Hebrew, and it doesn't have to be in Hebrew. It can be in Aramaic, in Ladino, in Yiddish, in English, in French. But you have to know this long conversation that started with Abraham and God, and to know what they were talking about before you, and then to join in and to say something of your own. And I feel that Alma is trying to be part of this big revolution or evolution of Hebrew culture.
And I think also, I mean, we share something which is like this deep love of Tel Aviv. You know, as you know, I love this place. I'm crazy about Tel Aviv. And I also think with you that, and especially for our friends from overseas, when people think of Israel, then they might think about the biblical ethos and the richness of Jewish religious culture, and without obviously undervaluing these things, which are huge and amazing and obviously have their place in the canon of world culture. There is right now in our period something that is really rather extraordinary, which is this Hebrew culture, this new revolutionary, in many ways also a rebellious Hebraic culture that's alive and kicking in Tel Aviv with poetry and polemics and debates and deeply original and subversive ways of dealing with the heritage of our ancestors, which is often, which is less translated, it is less known. And I think also this conversation, for us to be having it in English, I think it's siman labaim, it's a sign for things to come, because we at Alma are gonna also now try and engage more internationally in terms of Hebrew culture.
Internationally and on the internet, to try to open what is happening here to people that can't just drop in Tel Aviv. And when you were talking, because of your accent, I wanted to say that it's something very Parisian, something in Tel Aviv, and we learn it from our fellows, because I'm already the old generation. You're young, but they're even younger. And so many things are happening. So much is written, so much is dance, so much music is so much spiritual stuff is going on, that I'm happy when this house can kind of hug and give place to those young people that are now actually building what it is, what Jewish culture is going to be for the next generation. And the fact that they do it in a dialogue with the ancient classic text makes me very, very intrigued and very happy.
Last question, Dr. Ruth Calderon. What is Alma, in your vision, going towards? How do we evolve, insofar as you're concerned, from here?
Well, I think this coronavirus that kept us indoors also opened us to Zoom and to understand that our friends and colleagues are a minute away, and that we should stop the thinking that, you know, everybody have to come here in order to see what we do, and to open ourselves out. And so I think homes for Hebrew culture could be built wherever there is a phone, wherever there is a computer, and that we should, like the Tikkun Leil Shavuot, the whole night study session for the holiday of Shavuot that we are celebrating here next week, God willing, for the 24th time, that was brought to New York and now is happening all over America, and it's an Israeli creation. Many other things could be transported or invited, to invite other communities of Israelis abroad. There's almost 1 million Israeli Americans today, unaffiliated, post-affiliated, and Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Orthodox, and ultra-Orthodox people, to say what we do here is not just another denomination, but a space that could be a meeting place of all Jews, and by the way, non-Jews too, that are intrigued and want to take part in what Hebrew culture has to offer. And in the same way, for us to learn from the people on the other side of the lens and see what they create and what they do, and take it into our spiritual life, cultural life in here.
Dr. Ruth Calderon, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this fascinating conversation. To all our friends hearing and listening and watching, feel free to get in touch with us if you want to see how to get involved. If you're visiting and you hear about stuff we are doing in English, in French maybe soon, in Hebrew obviously all the time. Check us out check out our activities and our schedule on the internet, and I'm sure you'll find something to your taste, and I'm sure also you'll be hearing about Dr. Ruth Calderon's latest new ventures and adventures and visions. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you very much, Dr. Ruth Calderon.
Thank you, Dr. Jeremy Fogel.
We love Tel Aviv.
We do. And Tel Avivism, you're all welcome. We are Alma, home of Hebrew culture, on YouTube. There's an internet site and Facebook, and look for us. We'll be there. And thank you for being with us and listening.
Thank you very much. Shalom Aleichem uleitchaot. From Tel Aviv. Bye-bye.